All right, we're at a little bit after 1, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Like I have said, I'm sorry if you were here 20 minutes early. I'm going to repeat myself again. If you have a question throughout this session, everyone is muted, so we can't hear any audio except for myself. Sorry about that. But Mieko is monitoring the chat throughout the session for all of your questions and comments. So if you have a question about a slide or something I review or need more details, just pop your question into the chat to either everyone or directly to Mieko. So we'll be stopping after every slide to answer any potential questions we might have. So let's go ahead and get started. So up on the screen, you should see our agenda for today's webinar. We'll start out by reviewing the Indian Trails Go Live schedule. Then we'll talk about remote offline, which is the type of offline we'll be using in a couple weeks when Indian Trails goes live. And then we'll review tasks that we'd like libraries to make sure they are completing prior and during the Go Live period. So let's start by reviewing the Indian Trails Go Live schedule. So October 17th is 15 days away, so we are getting close to adding our 26th library to the database. So the offline period for Indian Trails is going to begin on Thursday, October 17th. So on that Thursday, Indian Trails will begin using offline circulation using Polaris. On this Thursday, all other CCS libraries will remain online. So on Thursday, October 17th, Indian Trails will be the only library who is using offline mode. On Friday, again, Indian Trails will be the only CCS library in offline. All other CCS libraries will remain online throughout the end of the day. In the morning before libraries open, Innovative will copy our production database over to training. That means training will be down for a couple of hours, but again, this should be completed before 9 a.m. Before libraries open. So you shouldn't see much of an impact from that. After libraries close on Friday evening, a lot is going to be happening. So this is when it really all begins for everyone else. After libraries close at 9:15 p.m., Innovative will redirect our production Power Pack to training Power Pack. So if you remember from when Morton Grove went live, while Innovative is loading the Indian Trails data into production, all services will be down. So that includes Power Pack, Production Leap, Production Client, and so on. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's available and not during offline. However, to make sure that patrons can still search for materials in the catalog, we'll be redirecting our catalog, Production Power Pack, to training so that they can still search for and look at material availability. CCS, again, will take care of that with Innovative after libraries close on Friday. You don't have to do anything except potentially notify your patrons that this change might be coming. At 9:15 p.m., at the same time they're redirecting Power Pack to training, SIP authentication will be switched over from production to training. This ensures that patrons can still access remote databases, your e-content materials during the offline period. SIP authentication against production will be down during the data load, but again, we'll switch it over Friday night from production over to training. That way, authentication will still work for SIP tools. We'll also be disabling online comprise payments at that time as well. Saturday, October 19th is when the rest of our CCS libraries will begin using remote offline circulation in Polaris. CCS libraries will go offline Saturday morning at the start of the day and remain offline through the weekend. So if you remember back in January of 2019, we sent out a survey asking libraries to provide some feedback on what their preferences were for planned downtime. And the majority of staff did say they preferred to go offline over a weekend versus a weekday for a number of different reasons. So we decided to continue with the weekend offline for this project. let's review what is available while we're in offline over that weekend. Libraries can continue to check out materials to patrons in Polaris Remote Offline. Libraries can also choose to optionally register new patrons if they would like to. This is not required, it is optional. If you will be registering new patrons in offline, we do ask that you open a help desk ticket to let us know. You will need to designate a single workstation or 2 workstations to register new patrons on. The only activity that can happen on that workstation is new patron registrations, no checkout. So if you would like to register new patrons, you will need to have a workstation set aside specifically for that action. Libraries can optionally check in hourly non-holdable materials as well. So for example, if you check out laptops in-house to patrons for 3 hours and you don't allow holds on these items, you can check them out and then check them back in again if you would like. Patrons can continue to pick up their holds that are available for them on the hold shelf, and patrons can also search for materials in PowerPack. They'll also be able to log into their account in PAC, but functions such as placing holds and renewing items will be disabled. Even though our production database is down and unavailable to staff, access to Training Leap will still be up and running. So staff, if they would like to, can search for materials in Training Leap as well as look up patron accounts in Training Leap as well. We do want to caution that libraries shouldn't perform any transactions in Training Leap. We'll disable functions such as checkout, placing hold, and check-in, but any transactions that happen in training will be lost and they won't transfer over to production. So just a reminder for staff to be very careful with what they're doing in training. It's really just for reference only during the offline period. And as I mentioned earlier, database and SIP authentication will continue, but against training rather than our production environment. All right, no questions in the chat, so we'll move on to the services that are unavailable while we're in offline. So most items will not be checked in during the offline period. So you will need to hold materials for check-in until Monday when we go back online, or if you're Indian Trails, Tuesday. Libraries will not be able to run the pick list, and also you'll be unable to process holds. That's both checking in expired holds that have expired on the hold shelf, and staff won't be able to place new holds for patrons in Polaris. Staff will not be able to modify or update patron records, so you won't be able to update a patron's email address or phone number while we're in offline. Patrons will also be unable to pay any of their overdue or replacement costs, so no payment of bills while we're in offline. ILL staff will not be able to create new ILL records or on-the-fly records at the time of checkout. Tech services, you'll be getting a little break as well. While we're in offline, you won't be able to add or edit items, bids, etc. And as we've mentioned previously in the newsletter, API services will also be down during the offline period. So that includes services like Communico and Bootsy. We've worked with Communico to disable some functions within our library's Communico apps, but we do recommend you might want to reach out to some of your other vendors and let them know that we'll have this period of downtime in a couple of weeks.
We have a question. Is the staff client going to be updated before we go offline?
So training staff client? Yes. So the same with Leap, the training database itself will be updated Friday morning. So the data in training will be up to date as of Friday morning at about 7 a.m. Of course, as things are checked out in offline, training database will become more out of date as the weekend goes on. But yes, so Leap, PAC, and the staff client will all be available during the offline period with slightly outdated information and some functions disabled. Hopefully that answered your questions. Keep those questions coming in chat. We'll make sure we're answering them as we go along. So on Monday, October 21st, all CCS libraries except for Indian Trails could potentially come back online. So at the start of the day on Monday, all libraries will remain offline at the beginning of the day. Once Innovative has finished their processing, they and CCS will do QA to make sure everything looks as expected. CCS will be responsible for loading all of the offline files that are created during the offline period. And if all of that work is finished before 4 p.m. Central, we'll allow CCS libraries to come back online. Indian Trails, again, will remain offline through Monday. Once we're ready to come back online, Innovative will remove that redirect to training pack and will switch SIP authentication back to production. Once SIP authentication has switched back to production, and we'll communicate that with the IT and CERC listers, libraries will be able to turn back on their self-checks. If you are using your self-checks in offline, then those offline files can be loaded, and then you'll be able to resume sorting materials with your sorter as well. Any questions on that? Seeing a head shake from Mieko, so we'll go ahead and we will move on. Tuesday, October 22nd, Indian Trails will be live in Polaris, and they will begin using our production environment. In case something happens and the project is delayed, we have Wednesday, October 23rd reserved as our backup go-live day. We've done this before. We're not worried that at this time that we would have to potentially postpone their go-live. I see there is another question in the chat.
We had a question if we could send the SIP go-ahead alert to the admin listserv as well. So we will do that.
Perfect. That's a great suggestion. Yes, we want to make sure everyone who needs to know is informed, so we'll make sure we send that out to those lists. Thank you for that suggestion. All right, so now, any last questions about the schedule? Okay, and again, we'll share this PowerPoint so that you can review it internally after we're done here today. But now I wanted to review remote offline with everyone and provide a quick demo of the services that are available there. So I'm going to go ahead and hop out of my PowerPoint. So you should now be seeing my desktop, on which I have a few icons here in the middle. So for the Indian Trails offline period, we'll be using remote offline. So if you remember, back in January, we reviewed the two different kinds of offline. Remote offline, in which staff are connecting to the Polaris terminal server, and then local offline, which is a locally installed version of the offline software. So for this project, we are using remote offline. So to connect to Polaris Offline, you will open up the production icon that you most likely have on your desktop of your computer. So you won't be connecting to the training staff client, you'll be connecting to the production interface. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to double click my Polaris production icon. And here it's going to ask me to log into the Polaris terminal server. So I'm going to enter in my terminal server login. On your computer, you may have your terminal server username and password saved, so you might bypass this login step that you see here. But for those of you who don't use the staff client regularly, you may have to enter in your terminal server credentials at this time. So once I enter in my credentials, Polaris is going to connect me to the terminal server. And it's doing it very slowly for all of you at this time. Okay, here we go. So I'll see an alert notification reminding me that I'm logged into the production server. And then I'll see the Polaris logon screen. So when we're using remote offline, we are going to check this work offline button at the bottom of that login screen. Once I check work offline, you'll see that I'm no longer required to input a password. So what I'll do is just type in my Polaris username, again, making sure that work offline box is checked, and then I'll click OK. So now you'll see in my staff client toolbar, after my username, I'll see offline, so then I'll know that I'm logged in correctly to Polaris Offline. When you're in offline, you'll see that most functions are grayed out and we can't access them. There's really only two things that staff will be doing in offline. That's checking out materials and registering new patrons. So to check out materials, we'll walk through that first. We're going to go up to the circulation menu. When I click the circulation menu, I'll see that there are two options that are not grayed out, checkout and check-in. A reminder that we won't check in materials in Polaris Offline because Polaris is then unable to route items properly. So it doesn't know which library to send the materials to or if that item needs to be trapped for a hold. So you will not check in materials while you're in offline unless they are those hourly laptop, iPad, in-house use kinds of items. So to check out materials, I will select the checkout option here. This is going to bring up our offline checkout window. Now the first thing that I want to do here is go up to the Tools menu and click My Options. You want to make sure that you would enable printing of checkout receipts while you're in offline. So you can see here that in my settings, checkout receipt is unchecked. So if I want to print receipts, I need to check that box, and then I need to make sure I'm selecting the right printer and driver. I don't have a receipt printer hooked up to my computer here, so I'm not going to choose any options, but on your device, you would pick the correct printer and driver for your receipt printers. Then you would click OK. All right, so next, you're essentially ready to check out materials to patrons in offline. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pop in one of my test barcodes. So when I type or scan a barcode into the patron barcode field, you can see that a window popped up with some patron blocks. I have a lot of bills on my test card, so you'll see that my account, I'm getting a block that says that my card has been submitted to collection agency. I also have a registration has expired block as well as a check phone number block. Now you can see that I do not have the option to click OK and proceed with this transaction. That's because patrons who have a collection agency block on their card, you cannot check out materials to them in offline. That is sort of the one hard block that Polaris Offline is using to prevent patrons from checking out materials. So I'm out of luck with this test card, so I'm going to pick a different one. All right, so when I scan in this barcode, you see this card does have a block as well. It's a check phone number block, but I can actually just continue with this transaction by clicking yes. So when you're offline, you may see patron blocks pop up as you're working with your patrons, and internally you can decide when it's appropriate or not to continue with checking out items or materials to those patrons. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm not too worried about a check phone number because if it's wrong, I can't update their account right now anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. You can see that when I scan my barcode, my name as well as my home library did pop up in the top half of the checkout screen. So the next thing I'm ready to do is actually scan or type in an item barcode that I'm ready to check out. So I'm going to go ahead and scan in my barcode. And once I click enter, you can see that that item has been checked out to me. The due date is now October 23rd. So by default for CCS, the default checkout period in offline is 21 days. Some libraries have different default checkout periods, but for most libraries, I believe it is 3 weeks or 21 days. That means that all items I check out to patrons in offline will be checked out for 21 days unless I modify or set a special due date. Most of the time, I believe most libraries just check materials out in the offline for that default due date to make it easier for both staff and for patrons. But there may be some special instances in which you do want to give an alternate due date to some of these materials. For example, steam kits or special items that you don't want to go out for that full 21 days. If you would like to set a different loan period, you can select under the loan period box the special button. When you click the special button, it will open up another window that allows you to designate a different loan period. So if I wanted to check out, for example, a kit for 7 days, I would either select the due date I would like from the calendar or type in the actual loan period here on the right-hand side. When you type in or select an alternate loan period, you can choose if you want to apply it to the next item, so only one item, the next item you scan. If you want to apply it to all items for this individual patron, or if moving forward you want to apply this alternate loan period to all checkouts that follow. For this example, I'm going to choose to apply this 14-day loan period only to the next item that I check out. So I've typed in my 14 days up at the top. I'm going to click OK. You can see that now my special loan period is shown as being 14 days. So when I check out my next item, rather than being due on the 23rd of October, it is due on the 16th. So we have some questions here in the chat, so Meiko is going to review them.
So the first question kind of goes back to the blocks that pop up. Will the hold alert block pop up? I don't believe it does, but we will double check that and send out a solid answer. And the second question is, can we disable the check-in feature in offline for libraries that don't use hourly check-in?
Unfortunately, there's no way to disable the check-in feature. You will just need to make sure that you remind your staff that they should not be checking in materials that are returned to the library. But unfortunately, we don't have control to disable that feature. Would be a good idea, though. Is that it? Okay. All right. I think we've tackled our questions we've gotten so far. Again, continue to send in those questions to the chat so that we can make sure we address them. So moving back to my patron that I have here, if this patron's done, they only have those 2 items that they want to take home with them. Now we need to just complete that transaction. To do so, you'll place your cursor into the item barcode field, and you'll just tap the Enter key on your keyboard. That completes the transaction, and it will also trigger a receipt to print to your receipt printer that you've selected in your options earlier. All right, perfect. So I'm going to do another test checkout for you just so that you can see it one more time. This time I'm going to pick a different card. I have a lot of test cards, as you can see. So for this patron, we can see that this patron's account also had a check phone number block. But what you cannot see is that this patron does owe $60, which would be over our second level fine threshold. So fines or money owed on the account is not considered, or offline is not able to identify patrons who owe over a certain amount in offline. So just a heads up that those will not pop up as blocks when you're working with patron accounts in offline.
Sorry, are you good for a question?
Yes, I'm ready for a question.
We have another question. Will RFID pad check-ins work with offline?
I do not know. My gut would say probably not, but we'll need to check on that. So that's one of the questions. We'll touch base with Innovative, and then we'll send out the answer along with the video recording. That's a good question. All right, so again, this patron account does owe $60. That is not indicated in this patron block, and I'm going to continue to check out to them anyway. I'm going to just type in a couple more barcodes. And then when I'm done checking or scanning in my item barcodes, I'm going to place my cursor in the item barcode field and place enter on my keyboard, and that completes the transaction. Are there any questions on checking out? It's pretty simple. I know you guys are all probably experts at this by this point, but it's always good to have a review. So I'm going to close my offline checkout window, and we'll quickly walk through how to register a new patron in offline. And again, this is optional. You can decide at your library if this is a service that you would like to offer during those 3 days. If you do want to register new patrons, we ask that you submit the workstation that you'll be using to register them by emailing help@ccslib.org. So to register a new patron in offline, you'll select the Patron Services menu and open the Patron Records option.
I think
we have one more question, so hold on.
So I think we just need some more clarification about checking in materials. So again, it's just the items that are able to be checked out hourly. Those can be checked out and checked in within the same day, right? So pieces of equipment, laptops, things that you are going to lend out to your patrons for an hour or two. Things that check out like overnight and patrons can place holds on, those are the things that are not able to be checked in through offline.
Correct. So to kind of summarize that, your in-house checkout, so things that you check out in-house to patrons for just a couple of hours, that they're not holdable. When you check it back in, there's no chance it would trigger a hold for another patron. It's okay to check out and check in those materials. You don't have to. If you prefer, you can keep track on paper. I've talked to some libraries who said that that's their preference for when we go offline. But if you want that transaction to be entered into the database, you can check them out in offline and then check them back in when the patron brings it back to the desk.
And then question, will a copy of the patron database be available for reference purposes? So yes, we will have, staff are able to access training links, which will be updated Friday before libraries go offline. So if staff do need to reference a patron record, they can do so in training links. They just won't be able to make any updates to the patron record, take fines, or check out to the patron in training links. They will have to use offline to check out.
Correct. So you can still look up patron accounts if you need to in training leaps, but you will not be able to do anything with those patron accounts while we're in offline. So patrons can't pay an overdue fee, they can't change their address or that sort of thing while we're in offline. Training is only for reference. So only to just confirm or verify patron account information. Okay. Those are really good questions. Keep them coming. We love questions. So I'm just going to step back and close my window and start again. So to register a new patron in offline, you would select the Patron Services menu and then choose Patron Records. So you can't search for patrons in offline. You can only register new patrons if that's a service you opt in to offer during those up to 3 days of downtime. So when you click Patron Registration, you'll see that the offline registration window pops up. on this offline registration window, you need to complete the fields that are bolded. So you'll see that fields such as barcode, last name, first name, that they're bolded slightly. So those are the fields you need to complete in order to save this record. So I'm going to go ahead and create a test record here. And one thing to note, this could be a helpful time for you to look at training leave. That way you could do your search in training leave to see if this patron already has an account in the database or has an account at another CCS library. When I save this new patron registration in offline, I'm not going to be notified if there is a potential duplicate in the database. So that's one helpful way that you can use training during this offline period. Right, so I'm going to complete my fields here that are required, my registration branch, my patron code. I'll ensure that my expiration date is correct. And the next thing I'll want to add is an address for this account. It's not always clear where you go to add an address, but in this address box, right beneath it to the right-hand side, there's an add button. Now I'm getting an error here, I'm not sure why, but if I click OK, it just moves me right to the address field. So now I can enter in the address for this patron account. And I cannot spell correctly today, but here we go. So once I've completely filled out the patron's address, I'll click OK. And then I'll see that address pop up in this address box here. If I needed to, I could go back and I can click Edit and make a modification. So at the bottom, you can set the patron's notice preference. So if they would like their notification option to be mailing address, you can choose that. If they would like to receive phone notices, you would select phone 1, 2, or 3. And then they can also optionally choose text messages. Don't choose fax or EDI because notices are unfortunately not sent, or fortunately not sent through either of those methods. If they would like to give you their phone number, you'll put that in the phone field. And then you can also input their email address as well. Now these fields are not bolded, so you do not have to input that data. But obviously phone number is recommended that you would complete that information. On the left-hand side, you can see that this offline registration work form has three tabs. There's 3 views. So next I'm going to click on the general view. And this does have a required field that I have to complete, which is the ILL RB library code. So if this was one of your patrons, you would select your library here. If it was an RBP patron, you would select the patron's home library. I'm going to pick a random one, but you would choose your library, again, if it was one of your patrons. On the last tab, you could complete a custom data field, but it doesn't look like we have any available in offline. So what I would do next is just click the Save button. It's going to yell at me because I didn't put in my email address, and I should have. So I'm going to change my notification type to be mailing, at which time it should allow me, after I uncheck the additional text notice, then it should allow me to save the record. And once you click Save, you'll receive confirmation that you did indeed save that record. And we do see some questions coming in here.
Oh, there's just a question about how many libraries are offering patron registration. At this time, we have just a couple who have indicated they're going to register patrons in the upcoming offline. I was trying to remember Morton Grove Offline, I believe about almost half the libraries is patron registration.
Yes, right now we have heard from 3 libraries that will be registering patrons during that offline period. They are Algonquin, Niles, and Fox River Valley. So if you are planning to register new patrons and you're not one of those 3 libraries, let us know by opening a help desk ticket. Again, it's not required that you register new patrons. It's definitely optional. So you'd want to talk internally about if that's the best route for your library. All right, so once I've saved that patron record, I'm done. When we go back online, CCS will load new patron registrations first. That way, if those new patrons check out any materials during offline, their account would be there before we try to load the checkouts. And that way, we ensure that nothing will error out.
So question, what happens when this data is loaded into production and some of the required fields were not entered?
The record would be loaded into production, but then the next time that you open that patron account and try to edit it, you'll be asked to input those required fields. So there wouldn't be an issue with the actual loading of the record, but the next time you try to access that in production, if you wanted to save or update it, you'd have to input the fields that we require, like birth date. Right. Now, when we are offline for these 3 days, we do recommend that staff log on and log off about every every 2 hours. To log off of Polaris Offline, it's very simple. You go to the File menu and then click Log Off. When asked to continue, just click OK. And now you will just log back in again. You'd go back up to File and click Log On. You'd check Work Offline and then input your username into the username box. The reason we recommend that you log off every 2 or so hours is because that creates smaller offline files. When we go back online, it'll be just quicker to load these smaller files. It also decreases the risk that potentially an offline file or transaction could be lost. So we recommend about every 2 hours. It doesn't have to be 2 hours on the dot. If you're really slow Saturday morning and you only deal with a few patrons, you can wait 3 hours. But again, we do recommend that you log off and log back on every couple of hours throughout the day, with Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Okay. All right, so I'm going to hop back over, unless there are more questions about using remote offline, I'm going to hop back over to my PowerPoint to review a couple of things that are on our to-do list, or on your to-do list as well. So in the next couple of weeks, there's a few things we're asking libraries to do to prepare for offline. So again, as we mentioned, if you're planning to register new patrons, please send the workstation name to CCS. You can do that by opening a help ticket, by emailing help@ccslib.org. We also ask that libraries review and test remote offline procedures by the end of the day on Thursday, October 17th. What we are trying to avoid is libraries having issues with remote offline Saturday morning, because at that point we won't be able to resolve whatever the issue might be. So please, in the next couple of weeks, set aside some time to test remote offline on your circulation workstations. And if you encounter any issues, please open a help desk ticket and we'll help you get those resolved.
One question about when should libraries disconnect their sorters before going offline?
It's coming. Hold on. Next slide. We're going to get to that. I promise. That's a good question, and don't worry, we will answer that. So again, registering new patrons, send us the workstation name. Please, in the next couple of weeks, test remote offline. A couple of you've already done that, and you sent in some reported issues, so thank you so much. We should be able to get those resolved quickly. One thing you probably want to make sure you do is that you share instructions for remote offline with your staff who will be working that weekend. So we do have procedures available on the portal, and we'll send those out as PDF as well in the newsletter, so you can download those, print them out, have them handy for staff. We also have a number of video tutorials that we created in January when Morton Grove joined CCS. So those are just quick video tutorials that walk staff through how to check out and how to register new patrons. We'll also record this webinar, and you are more than welcome to share that with your colleagues who are unable to attend. So we want to make sure that all staff who are going to be working that weekend feel comfortable, confident, that they'll be able to use offline successfully. So we have some resources for you to share with them. We also would appreciate it if staff who are working that offline weekend could subscribe to CCS News. So we'll be sharing communication during the offline period via CCS News. So it's crucial that staff who are working stay informed about what's happening, and the best way to do that is to subscribe to the newsletter. So we can subscribe staff in bulk. So if you have a list of staff emails that you want to subscribe, go ahead, open a help desk ticket, and we'll get them logged in all at once. They're signed up all at once. All right, so this is a more specific to-do list for the actual offline period. So on Friday, October 19th, when you close, I know some of you close earlier at 5 or 6, and we have 1 or 2 open till 9. At that time, you'll disable your self-checks and sorters, or you can set them in offline mode. So if you will, a number of libraries have successfully used their self-checks in offline mode for the Morton Grove migration and for our larger migration to Polaris. So if you have done that, you're more than welcome to continue to use your self-checks in offline this time around. But if you've never done that before, we do recommend that you would arrange an offline test with CCS. So Friday, I have a typo. Oh no. Friday, October 18th. I am so sorry. I'm confusing everyone here. That should say the 18th. Friday, October 18th at 9 o'clock, disable your self-checks and sorters. You can also disable them in the morning on Saturday. That's fine as well. We just want to make sure that they are disabled before staff start using them Saturday morning. So whichever is easier for your staff. On Saturday, October 19th, I will fix this PowerPoint before I send it out to you. On Saturday, October 19th, all libraries will begin using Polaris Remote Offline for checkout and optional patron registration. On Saturday as well, you'll want to make sure that staff know how to get to training leave. We'll send those URLs out in the newsletter, but it might be helpful to have it bookmarked specifically for this weekend. On Monday, when or if CCS gives you the go-ahead, we'll then move back into production and we'll communicate with IT, CIRC, and libadmin that it's time for you to re-enable your self-checks and your sorters. All right, so Friday after you close, disable your self-checks and sorters. If you leave your self-checks on, and if you leave your sorters on, they'll check in and check out against training, and we will lose those transactions. So you do want to make sure that we don't forget this step. Saturday, all libraries will start using Polaris Remote Offline. We'll want to make sure that staff can get to Training Leap so that they can look up accounts and that they can look up materials. But again, remind staff they shouldn't be doing anything in Training Leap. It's for reference only. On Monday, we anticipate all of CCS, except for Indian Trails, will be back online. CCS will communicate with libraries through CCS News, and will also communicate in addition that it's okay to bring up your self-checks and your sorters. We'll email IT, CIRC, and libadmin listservs. Okay, that was a lot of information, but we do have some time for questions. So let me hit them with us in the chat. Mieko is monitoring. She's anxious to get a couple more in here. So does anyone have questions about procedures, the timeline, or tasks that we need you to complete prior to Friday, October 18th? Radio silence on the chat end, which is good. I know that everyone is comfortable, confident. We've done offline before, and it went very well with the Morton Grove migration, so I know that it will go just as well this time around. If you do have questions that pop up after this call ends, you know where to find us. Please don't hesitate to open a help ticket, give us a call.
I have a really good question here about messages on the Power Pack. So libraries don't need to do anything to their individual Power Packs. CCS will be taking care of the redirect. So libraries don't have to worry about updating or changing anything on their end.
That is correct. Yep. So during that pack redirect that happens Friday night after 9 p.m. or after 9:15, all pack URLs, everything's going to redirect to the system level CCS training pack. So we'll take care of customizing that, putting up a banner, disabling features, so you do not have to worry about anything. We asked libraries in our January survey what they would prefer, and most libraries prefer that CCS would take care of that rather than handle it individually, library by library. So you can rest easy. By the time you wake up on Saturday morning, that will have been done. Cool, that was a really great question. Any more before we sign off? No? Okay. Ooh.
Oh, one more IT question. Is there a way to verify that our Surf computers are capturing things as they should be?
Oh, you bet. So so CCS staff, Mieko and I will be working during offline weekends, so I will be checking throughout the day on Saturday to make sure that transactions are being saved and stored on the terminal server. So if I notice that your library is not generating any offline transactions, I'll reach out to that library. I'll give you a call.
Can I test beforehand? For sure.
Yeah, of course. We love it if you test beforehand. Actually, please do test beforehand. And if you run into any issues, let us know. You can call us, open a help desk ticket, and we'll work to resolve that before that Saturday. Great questions. All right, well, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and we'll sign off. Again, we'll send this recording out as soon as it's available. We'll also send out additional resources such as links to our video tutorials, offline procedures, and so on. If you would like us to bulk subscribe staff to CCS News, feel free to just open up a help desk ticket, and that will take us just a couple minutes. So we're more than happy to do that for you. Again, thank you all so much. We are ready and excited for Indian Trail to join CCS, so I know that this is going to go just as smoothly as the Morton Grove one did in January. So questions, you know where to find us. Please let us know, and thank you again for joining us.